The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining this afternoon's webinar. Today we're going to be discussing how wired and wireless conference systems make meetings easy. My name is Cheryl, and I'm joined today by Chris Lyons and Michael Suhanka, and we're going to get into that presentation in just a moment. But before we get to it, just a few items to note. First of all, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. Usually takes us about 1 to 2 weeks for us to get that edited and up, so please be a little bit patient. But within about 1 to 2 weeks, it will be available at shure.com/training. We also have a lot of other webinars archived there across a lot of different audio topics, so please feel free to go there and peruse all of our great learning across all sorts of great audio topics. That's shure.com/training. Second of all, as we go through the session today, if you have any questions, please feel free to type those into the question pane. If you do not see the question pane, look for a dark gray toolbar with an orange box with a white arrow on it. Click on that orange box and you should have access to the question pane. Ask any questions you may have, but please be patient. We will answer those at the end of the session. So that wraps up all the housekeeping. Let's get into the good stuff. Take it away, Michael and Chris.
Thanks very much, Cheryl, and thanks, Michael, for joining us all the way from Shure's German office today. Here's what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about systems for sound reinforcement versus discussion and conference systems so that you have a good idea of what do you choose when, what types of rooms or applications or requirements, and also the challenges involved in some of those situations. Then we'll spend most of our time looking at Shure's portfolio of wired and wireless conference systems, as well as some interpretation equipment and software that makes meetings more efficient. Then finally, we'll wind up by comparing wired and wireless conference systems and how they can add to the flexibility for a lot of situations. All right, let's look at the next slide. So sound reinforcement versus discussion or conference systems. Why do we even need a different type of sound system? It's because there are different types of meetings, and for different types of meetings, you sometimes need different types of sound systems. For instance, we're all familiar with a typical presentation, a one-to-many type of meeting, where you have one or just a few people up at the front of the room and they are talking to the audience, but the audio, the information is pretty much flowing in one direction. It's a one-way street. But sometimes you have a different kind of meeting that we call a discussion, where everybody at the table is equally a talker and a listener. That means everybody needs their own microphone, and it makes everything a little bit more complicated, and it's very difficult to pull off with a standard sound reinforcement system, actually. When you scale it up a bit and add some more formality, you get what we call a conference system. Still the many-to-many format, but a more formal flow and usually a fixed agenda, a planned agenda of what's going to be talked about. And then finally, we're all familiar with AV conferencing and collaboration, which is essentially a many-to-many call between different locations, but it's very informal usually. It doesn't have the rigidity and the need for additional meeting management tools that you find. So we're going to focus today on discussion and conference systems. So let's take a look at what's different between this hardware. So at the bottom there, you see sound reinforcement. So a typical sound reinforcement system is microphones, mixer and processor, then amplifiers and distribution to some number of loudspeakers. And it's pretty easy to scale that up to a point, but all the control of the microphones typically rests at the mixer with a sound engineer, with a technician. It's not real practical to give individual people their own control of the microphone, and if they are, it's only that they can control their own mic, but not relative to other microphones. If you expand out to a discussion system, you add some capabilities specifically in terms of microphone control. So in a discussion system, not only can each participant control their own microphone and turn it off or on, but a central technician or chairperson or secretary can remotely activate and deactivate microphones. And in larger meetings, that becomes a really valuable capability. You can also assign specific seats with a discussion system and say, okay, if we know that John Smith is sitting in seat number 5, then we know whenever microphone number 5 is active, we know that's John Smith that's talking. And that might be valuable for record keeping for a public organization. Then finally, in some cases, you have the need for interpretation because you've got participants who speak different languages. A discussion system sometimes gives you at least a couple of additional language capabilities so that you can route those languages back to participants and they can listen the way that they please. Now, if you blow that up into a conference system, you add even another layer of capabilities. First, you expand the interpretation capability so that you're now looking at many more simultaneous languages. And then in addition to that, you add capabilities like participant identification and seating verification. So you know who is there at the meeting and you know where they're sitting, either by way of putting in a numerical code when they sign in or maybe an ID card into the conference unit. Second, you've got recognition of different roles and privileges because each person at the meeting might be a different type of person. Maybe you've got some people who are senior members and they deserve extra speaking time or they get to speak first. All kinds of things like that, especially when you get into government applications. At formal conferences, there's typically a fixed agenda where the topics that will be discussed are decided on in advance. And in some cases, you even need some supporting documents so that people have background information that they'll need to consider those agenda items. So a good conference system will even permit you to link to online stored documents, perhaps. One very key feature, especially in large organizations and government agencies, is voting and polling. So a conference system has to allow for people to electronically cast a vote and then electronically record who voted, what did they vote on, and what was the outcome of the vote. In other words, how many people voted yay, how many voted nay, and was that a sufficient number to actually pass the measure being considered. And then finally, there's the need for external display. In larger rooms, especially with larger numbers of people, you want to have central display screens that might show the list of upcoming speakers, or maybe a list of the planned agenda items, or perhaps vote results after a vote has just completed. So that's how sound reinforcement, discussion systems, and conference systems sort of stack up. Let's take a quick look at the Shure products that apply to those 3 different roles. For sound reinforcement needs, we've got the traditional Microflex and Centroverse gooseneck microphones and table microphones, and even the MXCW wireless system, which are ideal for meetings, but you could connect them to an SCM820 automatic mixer if you like, or to some sort of manual mixer and have somebody manually activate and deactivate microphones. But if you want to expand into a discussion system that gives you more microphone control, you can look at the DDS-5900 discussion system or the MXC conference system, both of which give you extra controls and capabilities for discussion. Then finally, if you need a true conference system with those extra capabilities at the top there, we have the MXC or Microflex Complete conference system, which gives you access to use all those advanced capabilities and add software that can enhance the meeting management functions of the system. So that gives us an idea of what kinds of hardware we have. Let's talk about the challenges that arise when you're trying to handle one of these discussions or conferences. Michael, why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, here are some specific challenges with environments for discussion conferences if they were done with conventional sound reinforcement systems. Speaker placement, for example. Look at that image here. If speakers were distributed alongside the walls, they would actually face towards the microphone capsules and reduce gain before feedback for the overall system. Certainly suboptimal. Acoustic conditions. One of these nice boardrooms, but a lot of glass. Certainly a hollow room. Not very easy. Where to place speakers at all? At the glass? Certainly not. Not allowed for visual reasons. Where else? Ceiling? We don't know. But certainly, again, a challenge in terms of acoustics. Construction limitations. These wooden walls may not allow to drill holes or even place hooks for mounting speakers, and the floor must not be cut for cabling. And placing loudspeakers in the ceiling may not be allowed either. Or in other cases, the ceiling may simply be so high that the required sound pressure level for intelligibility at all seats may cause additional acoustic problems. Meeting size. From a certain number upwards, adding further participants would exceed the size of even the largest mixing consoles, right? Or increase costs and setup time for cabling in the star topology to an unacceptable level. Auto mixers, well, they could help, but only if the format is free-flowing and everyone can speak at any time, certainly not for formal meetings. And then flexible seating arrangements. Imagine in that multi-purpose room that we have here, you can see that by there is a dividable wall in the middle. It's open right now. So there are two rooms combined to one. So as a consequence, there are different seating arrangements, maybe even changing pretty quickly in the last minute. Now imagine we had an ad hoc addition of 2 participants in the morning before the meeting starts, and that at a spot in the seating arrangement where it was really not planned for. So for running individual cables to a central mixing device, it may literally already be too late. But there are answers to these challenges, the discussion and conference systems with their advantages. They usually better sound in acoustically poor conditions. And why is that? Well, conference systems follow the golden rule of designing a sound reinforcement systems where we say, try to place the microphone as close as possible to the talker and the loudspeaker as close as possible to the listener. I can only imagine one form factor that does it even better, and that's headsets. But who wants to wear headsets during a day-long conference, honestly? So second, those systems are more flexible in microphone control. Chris mentioned that already before. Microphone control can be either by participant role or with a predefined speech time, or arranged by a secretary, a technician, or if the chairman wants to give the word to specific requested parties, he can do that as well. So there are multiple ways of controlling the microphone. Certainly very difficult and challenging with conventional sound reinforcement system and the typical equipment of mix consoles or DSP mixers. Third is that those systems can accommodate interpretation, as we heard before. So multiple channels distributed to all participants. These conferences these days, they are all digital, and pretty much each talker's voice is converted into a digital bit stream and then put on a digital bus system. Then all of those signals are summed in a central unit. They are auto-mixed, they are processed, and they are distributed back to certain area of sound reinforcement. And that same happens with the interpreted languages. So every participant can pretty much select from as many interpreted languages as they are currently supported by the interpreters as participants of the meeting. And then further, it's those systems are very scalable. They are always using one in the same central unit, no matter if you're just connecting 5 units or 500 units or even more. And finally, definitely the installation is easier and the setup is easier. Daisy chain cabling saves time and cost. Remember our example from before when 2 participants needed to be added last minute before the meeting. All you would need with a conference system are 2 patch cables and 2 conference units. Power down the system, connect the units in daisy chain, and restart the system so that the new hardware can properly register with the central unit. And you're done. So this was all a lot of theory. Let's be a bit concrete and look at the portfolio that Shure can offer here with the advantages. And we'll take a look at the wired systems first. There we have actually 2. Chris will talk about the DDS-5900 in a couple of minutes. That's the lower part here with the less units. And the upper one is the MXC. And the latter one is fairly new. It was introduced last year, and we're now shipping all those units. And if we take a look onto the wireless path, we have one universal system called Microflex Complete Wireless. We'll also take a look at that later. And sometimes participants may want to enjoy the freedom of movement when they listen to simultaneously translated languages. This is what the DIR6000 infrared audio distribution system is for. So you can participants can either use this receiver that you see on the upper right side and headphones and select from multiple translated languages. Or they can also listen to program audio, for example. So this is a pretty universal system and provides an amazing good sound quality. And finally, there are two software products in the portfolio. One of them being more of a tool. That's a DCS-LAN calculator, which is a helpful tool for designing the cable structure for wired systems. And the other one is a real software, a feature-rich conference management software called Software 6000, and this is to prepare, to run, and to document a conference in all aspects. So let's take it, and let's start with the wired portfolio. And Chris, you want to take it away?
Absolutely. So in understanding a discussion or a conference system, there's really only three main components that are absolutely required. First one is the central unit, which Michael mentioned. That's basically the control center, the mixing board, the audio distribution system. All the brains are all in that one box. You just need one of those for the entire system, and that can go in a rack or under a table or whatever you like. Then you need Ethernet style cables, Cat5e or higher, but these are special in the sense that they're shielded, and I can't emphasize enough how important it is that they are high-grade shielded cables, because this system is sending a lot of data, and it's imperative that the cables are shielded to maintain the integrity of the data and the power supply to all the conference units. And then finally, you need conference or discussion units with gooseneck microphones, and there's usually an assortment of different ones with different form factors, different features for control, maybe different lengths of gooseneck microphones. But some assortment of conference units and cables and a central unit that gets you off and running. Then optional things that you might need, if you're doing multiple languages, for instance, you would need a number of interpreter sets for the interpreters who would sit in a booth at the back of the room. And you can have many of those depending on how many languages you need to provide and how many interpreters there are. The infrared audio distribution system is handy if you also have an audience that are not participating in the meeting as talkers, but they are listening, and perhaps they need to listen in a choice of languages, because you could distribute all of the interpretation signals through infrared with the little body pack and a pair of earphones so that they can listen to whatever language they want. At a lot of conferences now, it's becoming popular to have electronic name signs. Instead of making signs for every participant for every new meeting, you use an electronic sign that draws its information from the central control unit, so that if a person sits down at seat number 12, logs in, the system recognizes who that is and automatically displays their name, perhaps their title or their country on the electronic sign. So that's a very cost-effective and efficient way of dealing with changing names and changing people in different seats. And then finally, you've got the PC and maybe a tablet to do some control of the system and setup. We talked about how you could use that to configure the system and run the meeting, and also if you have external software running on a PC that provides some of those expanded capabilities that we talked about. And we'll be talking more about that later. So let's move on a little bit and talk about the DDS-5900, which is a basic discussion system. And that one gives you excellent sound quality, as Michael was saying, because everyone has their own mic and their own loudspeaker, and it's within arm's reach. So you get great sound, even in a variety of spaces where you might have high ceilings or some ambient noise or whatever. It's fast and easy setup because there's just one daisy chain cable that connects all the units together. So you go from the central unit to the first conference unit, and then from there to the second, the third, the fourth, and so on and so on. It's pretty easy, and it's a lot easier than a direct cable run from every microphone back to a mixing console would be. There's only a few components involved here because the basic conference unit itself can double up for different roles. So for instance, the same unit could be used for a chairman or for an interpreter or for a delegate, depending on what the role of the meeting is. So you can easily reprogram one unit for different roles. And then it does have multi-language operation. In this case, you can have 2 additional interpretation channels for each unit to listen to through headphones. So let's move on and talk about some of the core components here. We talked about the central control unit. It's the same unit for all of our conference and discussion systems, called the DISCCU. And it's a 1-rack space unit that has both all of the control capabilities and audio routing built in. So you see on the back there towards the left, there are 4 Ethernet jacks. That's to connect to different chains where the discussion units would be connected. Then you've got an Ethernet port that you can connect a laptop to do setup and control. You've got a choice of 8 analog audio outputs, so you could feed recorded audio, an audio recording system, for instance, or maybe to a video conferencing system, or perhaps you need external PA system for an audience, but you've got groupable, assignable outputs to handle that. And then there's, over on the far right, 2 analog audio inputs to handle external audio sources like you might have from, let's say, a wireless microphone for audience Q&A or for a presenter who needs a body pack wireless. So you've got a lot of flexibility built into that core component there. Now let's move on to the conference units, the discussion units themselves. The basic discussion unit here for the 5900 system, this is the tabletop unit. You've got your microphone and loudspeaker, but you've got a choice of different button overlays that give you different features depending on whether you're a chairman or an interpreter or whatever. Now, if we go to the next slide, there's also a permanently installable flush mount discussion unit. So if the layout's never going to change and it always needs to be there, you can drill holes in the table and mount this into the table firmly so that it's permanent. You've got a separate microphone and control unit with or without the interpretation controls, and then a separate loudspeaker unit, and those connect underneath the table with cables like that. But it's just a simple hole drill to get that installed and screw it down in a permanent install. All right, let's go ahead to the next slide. And that's for the people that need more than a discussion system. Michael, they need a conference system. So tell us about Microflex Complete.
So system minutes for Microflex Complete, what MXC stands for, is first and foremost superior sound quality. That counts for both, for the microphones and for the loudspeakers. We were using Microflex capsules on all of those goosenecks, and Microflex is really an established microphone capsule technology for a good 2 decades, if not even longer. Second, those are versatile. MXC is really versatile. From fixed installation to rental events, they are almost conference unit types and form factors for really most requirements. It's very scalable as well, from the smallest installations like a boardroom with just a couple of units, as you can see here, to multiple units, to parliaments, up to 3,800 if you need to. This is about 200 units here, so we have about 140 delegates in the rows, and then those 2 seat rows for VIPs and secretaries and board members here, and then there's an audience in the upper corner, left corner, behind the glass wall, and you can also identify the interpreter booths on the very upper left corner. So altogether about 200 units here in one installation. And further, there's redundant operation. Redundant meaning in the terms of that we have power supplies that are redundant meanwhile for the central unit. Should the central unit break down, there's really serious problems. So there's redundant power supplies for those in the system meanwhile. And we also recently introduced a redundant cabling scheme, which I will talk in a couple of slides of. Further, MXC is upgradable through firmware. So rather than having to invest into new hardware units, there's the possibility to add features by simply updating the existing hardware with new firmware versions. And then that system can also be expanded to its full capability and really get everything out of the system by adding Software 6000. The conference management software that I mentioned in the beginning, we'll also take a closer look in a couple of slides from now. Central unit, you've seen that before, but there's a slight tiny difference on that versus the previous image. If you recall, the LCD in the central unit for the 5900 showed 500,000 menu, and here we can see 6,000 menu. So the difference is that we're using one in the same hardware box, but in order to make the DISCCU work with MXC units, you actually have to upload what we call a feature license. We call that feature license 6000. And what is a feature license? Well, imagine it being an encrypted key in the format of an XML file, and that unlocks all the functionality in the CCU, which is already coded into the unit. Just it's locked until that key is received, and then you can actually use the system with MXC units. But please note one thing: we cannot use the central unit together at the same time with MXC units and 5900 series. It's an either-or option. It must be one system of only one type. And there's another important topic that Chris already briefly talked about, and I want to recapture that quickly. It is the selection of suitable cables and the proper treatment of those cables. In a nutshell, what that means is that you really only are allowed to take fully shielded Cat5e or Cat6 cables, Cat6 cables. And by only, we mean each and every cable in the whole installation, from the first to the last unit. Regarding proper treatment, basically you need to make sure that no overbending and no overfastening by cable ties or similar methods occur. That's the most relevant things. Regarding this topic, there is a best practices document available from the FAQ section or from Shure's Global Technical Support departments if you're interested in more details. Let's have a look at the conference units. There are portable and flash mount units, but more than on the 5900 series, and we group them in kind of 3 levels and by 3 form factors, if you'd like to. So what we call the standard units, providing microphone control, language selection, and the selection of the participant role, either chairman, delegate, or due delegate. Those are available in portable, in flush mount, and in modular form factor. Now, what's a modular form factor? Well, imagine you have installations where there's really not much space in the table area. A university is very typical with these relatively narrow rows of seats next to each other. In this case, we have taken all the electronics and put that in the central box that you see between the 2 flush mount parts here, and that electronics unit is then installed somewhere in the furniture in front of you, while the actual cutout is just covered by those 2 flush mount units that you can see here. The left one is without speaker, the right one has the speaker included, and then you plug in the gooseneck microphones. So actually, it's cost efficient as well, because 2 plates actually are fed by 1 electronics box. It's a kind of sharing of the electronics. But both of those participants are independent participants that can either vote or do different things. The next level, we're getting all the features and control capabilities of the first column, just we're adding voting. Those units are usually chairman and delegate only, not dual delegate, because the vote is counted by the unit. This is available in portable or in flush mount version. And then finally, the full-blown, fully featured unit, including a touchscreen display, and the touchscreen display allows to add a lot of further functionality. This is currently available as portable unit only. And if we finally took a look at how the software control of those happens, the standards unit are usually only controlled by the component GUI via the central unit, while the second and the third category of products are often not exclusively, but often controlled by also the Software 6000. Okay, a closer look to the interpreter console. the most important attribute of that unit is that it conforms to a newly established ISO standard for interpretation, a good 1.5 years old. The ISO number is 20109 for those interested in. You conform to that standard, and that is your golden entrance into bids and tender procedures for all the large installations. The unit further has two 3.5mm TRRS connectors for dual use with interpreter headsets. So by law, an interpreter is only allowed to work at a certain time limit. Translating, then he has to have a counterpart that more or less takes over. And this way here, we are connecting two units and they share the electronics, and it's a smooth transition from one to the other when they hand over the job. Alternatively, you can also use one gooseneck and a pair of headphones. Or if someone doesn't want to wear headphones at all, there's also an integrated loudspeaker at the rear of the unit, not visible here. But imagine this unit is standing in one of these cabins, in these interpreter booths. They usually have glass walls in front. So the glass wall would serve as a reflector and get the audio signal back to the interpreter. There are also braille labels and audio cues for visually impaired users. That's part of the ISO standard as well. And there are a lot more features, and some of them are yet to be released with further firmware upgrades. The next component, key component of MXC is the electronic name sign, as Chris indicated before. That's an e-paper display with 1900 by 400 pixels in 4-bit grayscale. So it's a black and white or gray type of e-paper display. There's dual-sided content available, so you can either have the identical or independent content. The image you see here on the left side, that's the view that you have sitting in front of your own name sign. The right side with the white background, that is what the audience actually sees. This is where the Shure logo is facing towards. Those units can either be tabletop or flush mounted, depending on the installation. And they can also have a single or dual participant capability. So two participants could actually share one name sign, which is a high cost saving, especially in rental applications. And finally, those units are powered via DCS-LAN. Important to note is that the actual powering of the units is only needed when content is programmed to the units. Once power is disconnected, the sign retains its content. And then, last but not least, the microphones. So we have specific MXC Gooseneck microphones developed for this line, and they have a locking 10-pin connector in an XLR housing. 10-pin because there are different signals we need to handle. Alone because of the fact that we have B-color LEDs in red and green. And we also want to keep a bit of a headroom in terms of pins for future functionality that we have in mind. So there's more coming with those kind of microphones. We just want to really avoid that there is a reinvestment necessary in microphones every couple of years. In terms of length, there are 3 variations to select from. 16-inch 40 centimeters, 20-inch 50 centimeters, and recently we have also added a 6-inch 15 centimeter mini shotgun. That's a detachable capsule as well. The 2 larger ones have either a single or dual band design, so they can be banded on the base and shortly before the before the capsule again. So you can really adapt it to whatever your current seating position is. All of them are featuring ComShield technology, which is Shure's approach for design for improved resistance against RF noise. And finally, all those Microflex capsules are interchangeable. So whenever there should be the need for going for supercardioid, for Omni, that can be changed as well. By default, they ship with cardioid capsules, apart from the mini shotgun, of course. And the final slide about that is a few on the optional accessories, and there are a lot of them. So we group them mainly in 3 blocks. First one is about NFC card reader and programmer. So rather than having a wired card to insert, meanwhile, you can also have an NFC card that actually helps identifying where you are seated. And then we have a group of accessories that all deal with the distribution of power, power redundancy for the power supply, so a backup, or with the distribution, the refreshing, the switching, or the splitting of DCS-LAN signals. So taking all those different accessories into consideration, and we don't go into detail at that point, but you can imagine how flexible you can create and design your cable structure with that. Third is a group of accessories dealing with audio. So those are more or less audio tap-out boxes. They are connected to DCS-LAN, and then they extract certain bus lines of audio, depending on what you want to listen to, from the DCS-LAN bus. And that can be either for recording purposes or to feed a broadcast truck or similar applications. Finally, there are accessories all around headsets and microphones. And on the upper right side, you see the new interpreter headset, which I'm currently wearing here during the webinar. One important key feature that we introduced with MXC is cable redundancy. I've mentioned that in the beginning. Cable redundancy through loop topology. So historically, with the predecessor series of MXC, you actually could not close the cable loop. You were not even allowed to. That corrupted the system in its operating mode. But that included the risk that in case you had a cable failure at some point, you would actually use certain units. In this case, the 2 units on the right side, they're simply losing connection because there's a cable failure. Now with MXC units, we can close the loop, and we are supposed to do so. Because in case, again, we have a cable failure here, the system now inverts the communication direction from the central unit back to the other half of the string, and none of the units really lose contact. So that's an important feature, so we can handle one single cable failure in a string. What is needed therefore is that little gray box that you see in an enlarged image here. That is called MXC ACCRIB, long term. It's nothing else than inverting the send and return lanes of the bus structure, so the turnaround of the direction for communication can be established. And important is as well, the central unit must be of firmware 8.4.0 and higher in order to establish that feature. So now we have heard about 2 wired lines, the 15900 series and MXC. To close that chapter of wired systems, let's briefly compare them. That helps picking out what to choose when, depending on specific requirements. So the number of conference units we have seen in DDS-5900, that were 3. In MXC, that's 9. The use of hardware accessories for power and audio, we have just seen that full assortment, which belongs all to MXC. Some of those are also usable for DDS-5900, but not all. In terms of scalability, 250 units is the max to be supported by the central unit if it runs in 5900 mode. And if it runs in the MXC or 6000 mode with feature license 6000, then you can actually support up to 3800 units. So this is really covering the largest installation ever in the world. In regards of supported simultaneous languages, Chris mentioned there is a limited number with discussion systems, so we have 2 for DDS-5900 and up to 31 with MXC. There's also a special operation mode required in a couple of countries that has to do with regulations around the procedures in parliaments, and that operation mode is called reply, and that mode is only supported by MXC, not in the 5900 series. I've mentioned before that feature expansion through firmware upgrades is possible for MXC, not for DDS 5900. In that case, there would have to be introduced a new hardware unit for the DDS 5900. Software control. 5900 series works exclusively with the browser-based graphical user interface. MXC can be selected, either be run with the GUI or with Software 6000. Cable redundancy through loop topology, a clear differentiator, MXC only, not 5900 series. And finally, there is a certain cable limitation, and that's when it comes to designing the length of a daisy chain cable structure. After a certain cable length, the digital signal needs to be refreshed both in regards to signal level and waveform. This limit is about 120 meters for the 5900 series, and it's either 100 or 200 meters for MXC. That depends which distance we are looking at. If it's the distance from the central unit to the first MXC conference unit, it's 200 meters. And then it's maximum 100 meters in between the MXC conference units. Especially that last point, in combination with power distribution, and we haven't even talked about that topic so far, over a cabling structure, that in the past has created some calculation effort for the designer or even guesswork when designing a wired system. But there are improvements to the situation in the form of a specific software, and that is the DCS-LAN calculator. Still available in beta version right now. But if you type in the shown URL here, you actually can get access to the designer software and register, and you can do your DCS-LAN calculations for either the 5900 system, the Legacy 6000 series, or MXC. There is a design area where you can graphically create your signal strings, as you can see here, your cable strings. You get design warnings when you get closer to limits. Orange when you get closer to the limit, red if you exceeded the limit, and that can be either because of not enough power or the signal getting not good enough anymore and needs to be refreshed either by repeaters or other units of that assortment of accessories that I showed before. There's also a property windows for units that you can actually get more specific information. And then further, you can export all those units here in a PDF file as a list and can put that to the documentation in your tender process, for example. Finally, there's an info view that's more or less to save your project, give it a name, and restore it later again. Software 6000, the other software product. Whom is Software 6000 for? That's one of the most interesting questions. When shall I add Software 6000 to my MXC hardware? Well, it's mostly for parliaments, local, regional, national parliaments, national and international organizations, stakeholder meetings, situations where there is really a large number of participants coming together in a very formal way, having a long agenda, having complicated voting procedures. These are all cases where Software 6000 is the suited addition to MXC hardware. The key attributes of Software 6000 is that it uses a standard SQL database. That's industry standard, and what it especially allows for is an easy exchange of data, which means import and export of data to other systems, to adjacent other systems like control systems, room booking systems, and other systems like that. So Software 6000 with that SQL database structure can easily be integrated into a larger installation. Scalability is also a key attribute. There's a modular structure. There are a couple of modules, so you can tailor your system to budget or to functionality needs, and you really only need to buy and to install what you actually need for. Last but not least, there is full language support. And what we mean by full language support is that you're not dependent on the manufacturer releasing another version of the software now supporting, I don't know, Japanese or other languages from time to time, but you can actually create your own language labels. And that's again doable via the SQL database. So you as a user can put in dialects, language, special terms, special language of your industry, whatever you need to store it as your own dialect, and can expand the language capability of your system over time. Let's have a final look at the capabilities of Software 6000. There are blocks, and this is only really a headline for a bunch of sub-functionalities, but one is all about meeting management, the next about agenda management, then advanced microphone control, which goes beyond the microphone control, which is available through the browser-based control interface, especially in regards to speech time control. Then we have reporting and retention of voting results. There are a lot of requirements from a legislative perspective in terms of documentation for meetings and all those kinds of things. This is where Software 6000 can really help and support and provide the functionality requested. Further, we have content design for external displays for audience information, which means in larger facilities, there is the need to display certain information at certain spots, and that's usually different information for different spots. Within a boardroom, outside of the boardroom, in the audience area, in the foyer, there can be different information distributed and designed and created in different screen appearances throughout a conference building. Mimic is also something, mimic control, which is a visual seating layout that's helpful for acting and controlling microphones, for example, in a visual way. Further, participant authentication by code or by card. Chris referred to that before, now also via NFC card for MXC. And then we have messaging between MXC, the full-blown, fully featured unit MXC 640, and PCs. And PCs can run a so-called CUA, which stands for Conference User Application. This is nothing else than a virtual conference unit transferred from a physical hardware unit onto a screen on your PC. So your conference unit is actually your PC, in many cases a touchscreen, for example. And last but not least is access to interfaces for streaming. This has been implemented in the past and will again be implemented when there are new APIs programmed. And there's much more also with Software 6000, but those 9-10 points here are the key capabilities of that impressive software tool. And with that, I'll hand it back to Chris for wireless system.
All right, Michael, thank you very much. So MXC does a whole lot with just one cable between each conference unit, but we know full well that sometimes even one cable is way too many. So we've also come out with the Microflex Complete Wireless System, or MXCW, which has a lot of really interesting benefits. So let's take a look at the wireless system now and see how it compares. So first of all, it's got really fast and easy setup. It uses automatic frequency configuration. So you basically take it out of the box, plug it in and turn it on. It automatically scans the spectrum, figures out which channels are clear, and configures itself. No buttons to push, no calculations to make, no menus to go through. Really, really simple. Second of all, since there's often no technician available during a lot of business meetings, the system uses interference detection and avoidance. So it has great reliable transmission, because if there's any change in the spectrum conditions, any new source of interference, for instance, the system automatically detects it, figures out where to move to a new channel that's clean and makes that move in the background. So everything reconfigures by itself. There's no need to stop the meeting, no need to push a button or do anything. The content of a lot of meetings these days is private, so for enhanced privacy, the system includes AES 128 wireless encryption. And it's very easy to use because you just set it up. There's a simple topology with an access point, which you can see at the back of the room there on a stand. And since obviously these are wireless, so everything has to run on batteries, we're using smart lithium-ion batteries that last all day for a full meeting's worth of power. So let's go ahead and look at some of these components specifically here. The first one, the backbone of the system, is the access point, which I guess you'd call the central control unit of the wireless system. You just need one of these for use with up to 125 conference units. This can go on a stand. If it's a temporary setup, it can be mounted on a ceiling or on the wall. No external antennas sticking out, very clean looking. It runs on power over Ethernet, so it just needs one Ethernet cable for power, control, and audio, and that's all there is to it. It does have a built-in menu, so you can set the thing up by just pushing a few buttons on the unit, or you can connect a laptop and log into a browser and do all sorts of other controls. There's also analog audio input and output connectors on the access point itself, so if you need to plug in, let's say, a handheld wireless microphone system for audience Q&A, or a body pack wireless system, or maybe you want to connect it to a video conference system, send and receive, you can easily do that with the XLR connectors. But there's also 10 channels of Dante input and output audio available on that Ethernet connector. And then finally, there's a mounting bracket, so it's easy to mount. And if you don't want to look at that LED screen all the time, there's a paintable cover that you can put over the whole thing and hide it all and paint it to match your room decor. All right, let's take a look at the actual control software built inside of the access point. So if I log my laptop into the right IP address, I can see all kinds of information that I can use to either monitor the system or set it up. There's a device menu where I can see all the devices that are connected to the system. I could type in usernames if I want to. I can monitor what the battery condition of every unit is, and so forth and so on. Then if I go to the next tab, which is audio, this is where I can adjust individual audio input and output levels for both the main outputs and inputs and the auxiliaries. I can also group certain audio channels together if I want, say, a recording of just the first 5 microphones or something like that. I can easily do that too. Then for the next tab, which is meeting controls, here's where I can configure the system for different microphone activation modes. Maybe I want people to activate their own mics. Maybe I want the chairman to have to do it remotely. That's where I type that in. And then I can also control the maximum number of open microphones at any moment. So if I don't want more than 2 or 3 people talking, I can easily set that. Then let's go to the last screen, which is the wireless tab. This is where, if you want to, you can see what channel the system has chosen to transmit on right now, as well as what the other channels look like. You can tell what the condition of those channels is, how crowded they are. And again, you know, if you happen to be looking at it at just the right moment, you might even see it change channels because it'll do that automatically in the background. But this way you can see which channels it's using. And if you want to, by the way, at this menu here, if there's a certain channel that's in use in your facility for a wireless LAN or something like that, you can easily click on a channel and tell the system, don't use this one. Even if it's open, just don't use this channel. So it's very flexible and easy to control. Let's move on to the conference unit itself now. So this is what the user sees, and it's one single wireless conference unit that's configurable for chairman mode, a delegate user, someone who is a listener only and who won't be speaking at all, or an ambient monitoring role. If you're connecting to a video conference system, you don't really want dead air in case everyone shuts off their microphones, so you might want to devote one unit to being a permanent monitoring microphone to just constantly transmit ambient sound. Let's see. Then the touch screen on the unit is a full color touch screen, which gives you a lot of meeting information. You can monitor the speaker request list and see who's speaking and is going to speak. When the chairman calls for a vote, you're presented with buttons that the user can press to cast their vote. And then once the voting has stopped, the screen can display the vote results. So you'll see how many people were present and how everybody voted and what the totals tallied up to. And there will probably be even more information in the future as we keep adding new features and capabilities that'll pop up on the screen here. Let's talk about the loudspeakers built in there so you can hear the floor mix, but there's also 2 independent channel selectors and headphone jacks and volume controls so that 2 people can plug in a pair of earphones or headphones and listen to interpretation audio if they want to. And you just select which language you want on the touch screen. Over on the side of the unit, you can't really see it here. There's a card slot where you can insert an NFC ID card so that if your system is configured that way, when you sit down, you put in a card, and now the system knows who it is that's sitting at that unit and can track it that way and present it on screen that way. Instead of Unit 3, it'll say Chris Lyons. There's more than one way to charge the system. You can charge it by a USB port on the back of the unit. You could even permanently power it if you want to do it that way. But there's also an accessory networkable charging unit, which is really handy to have, which holds the 3-cell lithium-ion batteries. You just plug 10 batteries in there, charge them up, and then put them in the conference units before the meeting's ready to start. You can remotely monitor the battery runtime left remotely, or you can see it on the screen of every conference unit. There's also a button on every battery so that you can quickly check how good is this battery, and you'll see the remaining battery time in hours and minutes. It's not some sort of little bar graph, so it's really accurate. The charging unit itself has 10 slots, LEDs that tell you what the status of every battery is, and that's a networkable unit, so I could plug it into my network and monitor it remotely if I want to. There's even a storage mode if the thing's going to be on the shelf for an extended period, and it comes with rack mounts so that you can mount it in a standard 19-inch equipment rack if you like, or you might want to just put it onto a tabletop or inside of a cabinet or something like that. Then finally, of course, you do need microphones, and we have the same selection of microphones used in the MXC wired system, so you can choose from different lengths of gooseneck, the mini shotgun, and so forth. Same connector, same microphone capabilities using the interchangeable Microflex capsules. So we've gone through all of that very quickly, but how do you decide which one's right for me? How do I compare wired versus wireless? Let's talk about that. Well, the wired system is typically used in permanent installations where it's not going to be installed and taken away very frequently, at least. Because you've got flush mount units available, you get really sort of the lowest visibility if that's really a concern. You want something that's very discreet looking. Especially if you have fixed furniture and the seats don't move around much, the tables are in one place all the time. A wired system is ideal for that. And if it's an application that has some advanced functionality requirements, like we talked about multiple voting methods or expanded agenda monitoring or information display and so forth, you could add the SW6000 software to the wired system and do just about anything you can think of. The wireless system is ideal for rooms where you've got either moving furniture or reconfigurable rooms, or even a rental business where it's changing locations, like different conference rooms in a hotel, let's say. It takes less than 2 minutes to set the wireless system up, so you can easily, the morning of a meeting, just before it starts, get the thing set up and running in no time at all. Also, because there's no cables, you don't have to worry about drilling holes. You don't have to worry about limitations from furniture or flooring, or perhaps historic buildings where there's a rule that you can't change anything. But ideally, the situation where you've got different, like a multi-purpose room where one day it's set up classroom style, the next day it's theater style, the next day it's a U-shaped table. A wireless system is great for that because no matter where the tables go, the system goes with it. So that's a lot of information about conference systems of different types, wired, and there's certainly more than that to know, I think. And you might be wondering, well, what if I've got deeper technical questions or I want more information? The Shure Audio Institute has got both sales and technical training courses on both the wired and wireless systems online. There's also some instructor-led training for our installers and distributors, a certification program, and of course you can also browse all the other webinars we've done at the Shure.com websites. And if that's not enough, there's always our global technical support departments. You can log on to Shure.com and find the one nearest you. You can find someone in your region of the world who knows the product that you have questions about.
You can also email support@Shure.com, and they'll route it to somebody in your region if need be.
Perfect. And speaking of questions, Cheryl, has anybody asked a question?
Well, we have one so far, so I'll start with that one. If you have any other questions, now is the time to type them in. Question number 1, this is an interesting one. What is the audio difference in terms of the mic and speaker quality between the DDS and the MXC?
That's a good question. Michael, do you want to field that one?
Yeah, I can take that. In terms of microphones, actually, the DDS-5900 yet comes with microphones that are of a slightly lower quality than the Microflex capsules are, but there is a choice of also upgrading Microflex capsules on the DDS-5900. In order to do so, you need a special adapter, and that you can do for the flush mount units. And this way you can actually upgrade and exchange your microphones. The rest is all microphone capsules along the wired portfolio. In regards to the speaker, both are high quality speakers, and you hardly hear a difference between the 5900 and the MXC. There may be a slight advantage in terms of size of the MXC because there is simply a bigger body where the speaker is placed into, and a larger loudspeaker box, as we all know, allows you to get a bit more bass. So I have the impression the MXC has a bit more bass volume around, but that is relatively irrelevant for voice signals using 150, 200 hertz upwards. So not a big of a difference.
Okay. When will the firmware support voting on the MXCW?
That's a great question, and that's supposed to be available in early March. We'll actually be demonstrating the voting feature on MXCW at the ISE show in early February in Amsterdam, if you're in that part of the world. But the firmware will be available for download in early March.
There you go. Okay. What is the price difference between the wired and the wireless units and system?
That's a good question. It's a little hard to say because we don't know what region of the world someone is in, and I know U.S. prices more than I know our global prices. It depends a lot on whether or not you're factoring in the SW6000 software, but the wireless unit tends to be more expensive than the more basic wired systems. I mean the wired conference unit. So if you're talking about a wired unit that's just, say, the simple one that doesn't have the touch screen and so forth, might be around $500 retail in the States, whereas the wireless unit might be around $1,000. But then you've got the central unit for the wired system, and you've got the APT for the wireless system. So they're not as far apart as you might think.
Okay. So in terms of pricing, just reach out to your local dealer or distributor.
Exactly.
You can go to Shure.com and be able to find them there, and they'll be able to give you pricing information for your region.
Right.
All right. Next question. Can there be custom images on the delegate stations for a customer request?
Are we talking the wireless system or the wired system?
The person does not specify.
Okay. Well, on the wireless system at this point, you can't display like a company logo or any custom imagery on the display screen, although we have had some requests for that. So that may be a feature we institute in the future. On the wired system, Michael, do you know, can you display a customer user logo?
I have heard of that request and that it is about to be implemented. I'm not quite sure which of the firmware version it currently is available already or is yet to be implemented. So I would be cautious, maybe yet to be implemented.
Okay.
But generally
Next
possible.
question. In regards to the flush mount systems, they have slightly odd icons. And this person has an application where they need just a mute. Can they reprogram and label these buttons?
Yes, you can. The left-hand button on most of the conference units is shipped with a button that just has 3 dots, and that's because that is a multifunction button. You can program what it does. It can be a mute button. If it's a chairman unit, it might be a next speaker on button or something like that. But you can go into the software and program what the button does, and if you're using it for a specific purpose, you can order replacement buttons as an accessory that say, for instance, mute or say mute all or next person on or something like that. And I believe most of those are with an icon rather than an actual word so that it's internationally friendly.
Okay. Next question. In the past, in Canada, the DISCCU ships without a power supply. Is this still the case? And if so, why not include it with the unit?
Yes. The DISCCU actually comes in, I can't remember if it's 11 or 13 different versions that actually differ only in the power supply cord that is included. So you can buy it without any power supply if you want. But if you're in a country that uses one of the 11 or 13 versions we have, like UK, North America, Brazil, and so on and so forth, you can order one packaged with the right power supply. So I have a feeling that the North American one would probably work in Canada.
Great. Are all the features available on SW6000, or are there additional advanced features?
Are all of the features available?
That's the question.
Well, I'd say that depends on what module is actually ordered. There is a base suite of the software 6000 where you get really most of the typical features aggregated to one suite. And then there are a couple of additional modules that you can select for that require additional licenses. And then you can further expand to 100% of scope of functionality within software 6000. So again, a base suite and a couple of modules to add to.
Right, depending on the capabilities that somebody actually needs in that installation, right.
Great.
Exactly.
Great. Okay. Are the new MXC units downwards compatible with the DCS-6000 units, even if they have to run them off a separate chain from the CU?
You can actually mix and match those. The central unit can talk to each of them individually. So you can have mixed units in one string, but there are some drawbacks or some things to mention on that. For example, if you start with a couple of units and you want to use the cable redundancy feature of the MXC units, and you just insert one of the DCS-6000 units in that same chain, you would interrupt that capability of the loop, for example. So you need to be actually very cautious on where you place the units. If you want to have a mixed setup of 6000 and MXC units, what we recommend is that you would use single strings that are only consist of MXC units and other strings only consisting of 6000 units, so you can still use the full capability of the MXC units in one string and be limited to whatever the 6000 scope of functionality was in another port. If you don't have enough ports, you can add an EX6010 expansion unit that provides additional power and also additional ports. So from there on, you can expand your cable structure and aggregate those units of different types to different ports or strings.
Fantastic. All right. Are the speakers in the flush mount internally angled towards the user, or would they need to tilt them up a little for the best result?
The speakers in the flush mount units are not angled upward. They are projecting straight out the top, perpendicular to the surface there. So you can mount them flush, and they do sound good because you are pretty close to them. There have been some installations, though, where people mount the flush mount unit in an inclined part of the furniture or even in a small box that they construct. So you can do that too. I don't think it's essential, but some people like to do that.
Great. All right. I think that wraps up all our questions. If you have a question that you didn't get typed in time, you can always send it to us at support@shure.com, and one of our knowledgeable applications engineers can answer you back. So that's support@shure.com. We want to thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you learned a little something. I know I sure did. And we hope to see you on the next one. Thanks so much and have a great day.